Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. This is GearFest 2021, and we are joined by a wonderful artist. We have Warren Haynes with us today. It's great to see you, Warren.
Good to see you.
So I have to say, I was looking through your discography and all of the massive amount of work you've done. I think you have to be one of the more diverse artists I've ever interviewed. Everyone from William Shatner to Marty Stewart to, to of course, the Allman Brothers and Gov't Mule and the Grateful Dead family. Talk a little bit about that, how you see yourself as an artist and how you work yourself into all those different styles and different situations.
I've always enjoyed so many different types of music. I think growing up, I had two older brothers that both had not only great taste in music, but quite a collection. My middle brother especially wound up becoming a collector, and so at some point there were thousands of albums in our house. So it was like growing up in a musical library. And they both listened to everything from rock to soul to blues to jazz to folk music to country music to bluegrass and reggae. So I just kind of inherited that. And it stayed with me in the way that I've always loved playing as many different types of music as possible. And for me, it keeps me fresh to do as many different types of things as possible. I've kind of always been that way.
Right. So when you go into a situation, whether you're moving from, say, doing your solo material to working with the Dead or working with Dave Matthews or someone like that, do you adapt your guitar playing and your approach to what they're doing, or do you go in and say, this is what I do?
I mostly adapt in the way that I try to be part of what I think the music calls for, but I also try to do that by interjecting my own personality, assuming that it's meant to be. I never want to force any musical marriage. It needs to be natural and organic. But usually if somebody calls me, it's because they have confidence that my personality will fit into what they're doing. But I'll change, the approach, the tone, the influences, everything is flexible at that point. Maybe I might even go a little further in a new direction, and somebody might say, oh, no, we want you to do what you normally do. And then I have to pull back and do that, But it's always a challenge. Anytime you do something with another artist, you're trying to merge the two worlds together, and hopefully it works out in a positive way.
Right. So you're a triple threat with the songwriting, vocals, and with guitar. Tell us a little bit about how you approach writing a song, whether it's for a specific project or do you write the songs and then they find a home?
Well, it's always nice to have a project on the horizon that you're writing for. Dickie Betts and I used to talk about that a lot when we were writing for the Allman Brothers. It's nice to be able to write for the strengths of a band or an artist. And so if we were writing songs for an upcoming Allman Brothers record, we would think about the fact that there are two drummers, two guitar players, think about Greg's voice, the diversity of the band. But I also write a lot of songs just with the song in mind, and I've kind of sort out later where it belongs or if it belongs to any of the projects that I'm working on. As an example, during the whole last year and a half with COVID and everything, I wrote probably more than I've written since the 80s. But a lot of the stuff that I wrote doesn't necessarily fit into the category of Gov't Mule, and maybe it will wind up on one of my solo records, or it'll wind up some of it for a different artist or something. If I get an idea, I just try to write for the idea. But again, it helps to have in mind when I knew we were going to make a Gov't Mule record, then I could be focusing on the strength of that band and trying to write accordingly. And that's a luxury that you want to have.
Sure, sure. As you're writing these songs, how fully arranged are they as you're writing them? Are you writing with an acoustic guitar and a voice, and then later you say, okay, I'm going to have 2 drummers and 2 guitar players and keyboards, or are you writing all those parts at once as you're creating the song?
Well, it varies from song to song. When I'm writing for Gov't Mule, I tend to write a lot of the musical sections in my head, or I put them on a tape. Like a lot of times I'll just go to my phone and put them on a voice memo. When the band is learning the songs, I always take the approach of, well, this is what I hear, but if you got something else in mind, just play what you're feeling and show me what it is that that comes off the top of your head. We're so steeped in improvisation that we want the music to be conversational. So we want what I'm playing to influence what someone else is playing, and that to influence what someone else is playing, and for nobody to really know what they're going to play until they hear what everybody's doing. And that's the beauty of having a band, I think. Sometimes the songs will start out a certain way in my head and wind up going a whole different direction. I've learned through the years to be more and more and more open to that, But if I have ideas about certain melodies and harmonies and rhythmic sections, then I'll bring them all to the table. Maybe they all make the cut, maybe they don't. You never know. The instrumental sections are always fair game. And for that matter, the approach to everybody's part always leaves room for improvement. We're talking among ourselves about how to make the song better and trying different things, and not just for our own instrument. Like if somebody has an idea of what I should play that might make it better, I'm open to suggestion, and vice versa. But when the tape's rolling, whatever happens, happens. None of us really want to get locked into a certain part unless it's something we've rehearsed and feel like, hey, that's working great, let's hold on to that. Otherwise, each take is going to be a little different, and the one that feels the best is going to win out.
So how does it change then when you take the song from the studio and you've solidified it into a particular arrangement, and now you're going to take it on to stage? Do you open it back up, or do you say we're going to start with where we're at and go from there? Or how does that transition work?
Most bands, I think more about how they're going to take what they did into the studio and capture it live. In some ways, we're kind of the reverse. We want to be able to capture what we know we're capable of on stage. We want to try to be able to capture that in the studio, and that's not always easily done. Now, once we come up with a recording that we feel is the definitive version, it may or may not be played that way on stage. It may grow and go into a whole nother place, because a lot of times what happens is the songs that we record in the studio, 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, they change, and our approach to them changes. And at least in our world, we feel like the new versions are better, or at least more fun. So we also don't want to get locked into playing something a certain way all the time. Some songs tend to be a little more scripted, and others can float day by day.
And that's, of course, one of the beautiful things about all the live albums you've done, and also, of course, the Mule Tracks downloads and all the concerts that you've hosted there, to hear all those different versions of those songs as they evolve and grow through the years is really fun to hear what you guys do with them.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Mule Tracks, which is muletracks.com, is our way of allowing people to purchase what we consider to be a very high-quality recording of every show we've done since 2004. That sort of thing wouldn't work for a band that plays the same set list every night, that plays the same version of the songs every night. But for us, over the course of a tour, we might play 150 different songs, and even the ones that we're repeating vary from night to night. So for us, it works, and it allows our fans to tap into something. If they hear about a show they wish they had attended, they can go online and download it. If they were at a show and they had a specific memory of really loving that show, then they can purchase that show. So it's kind of a nice modern part of the music business for us.
Speaking of the live performance, the second leg, if you will, of your triple threat is vocals, and I'm always impressed because you guys do pretty much marathon concerts. I mean, you're doing some long shows with multiple sets and some rangy material as well. How do you keep your voice in good shape through all that?
I think it's just like any muscle. As long as you're using it, it tends to hold up pretty good. It's when I take a break that things start to get a little dicey. The few times that I've ever lost my voice was always at the beginning of a tour or at the beginning of rehearsal when I felt really good and strong and overdid it. But as long as I'm keeping my voice in shape, it usually bounces back pretty quickly if it gets tired. I try to pace the shows, because they are long shows, in a way that there is enough instrumental material and enough instrumental sections in some of the vocal songs that I can give my voice a break throughout, because I am the only one really singing. Whereas in some of the other bands that I work with, there are more than one singer. And since we play 3 hours, that's an important factor. But I like the fact that we play these long shows, and it does kind of help me stay in shape.
Yeah, I imagine so. Well, it's impressive stamina. So we of course have to talk about your guitar playing, and a big part of any guitarist's signature, if you will, is their tone, and you have a very distinctive tone. Talk a little bit about how your tone has developed through the years and how you perceive it when you're approaching a song.
Well, as someone who grew up singing and playing, I actually started singing before I started playing. And so all the guitar players that I gravitated toward were either guitar players who also sang or guitar players that sounded like they were singing through their instrument. I always loved that vocal-like quality that all my favorite guitar players, and not just guitar players, horn players, sax players, piano players, the ones that sound the most like they're singing are the ones that I've always liked the most. I think I made the connection early on that people like B.B. King and Bonnie Raitt and Leslie West felt like their instrument was an extension of their voice and vice versa. So when you hear B.B. King's guitar, it sounds like his voice. When you hear Bonnie Raitt's guitar, it sounds like her voice. I remember Leslie saying a long time ago, "I'm a big guy, I need a big sound," because his voice was so huge. For him to have some tiny little guitar sound wouldn't make sense. So consequently, he had this enormous guitar sound. I always was looking for a sound that captured the same characteristics of my voice. And as any guitar player will tell you, tone is evasive and elusive. You're always searching for it. Even on nights when you feel like, oh, my rig sounds great, I'm really happy with my sound, 5 minutes later that could change.
Right. During the course of a concert, we'll see you play a lot of different instruments. How do you choose the guitar that's going to create the tone that you want for a particular song?
I've always been a Gibson guy. You know, I've played Fenders through the years here and there, and I still love the way they sound, especially when someone other than myself is playing one. But for my own sound, I've always been drawn toward the Gibson sound. So when I want a sound that's a little brighter and a little more stratty, I gravitate toward a Firebird. If I want something that's kind of in between the Firebird and the Les Paul, I'll go to the SG. A lot of times the song dictates what kind of sound you're looking for. And my signature Les Paul, like I have here, is the most versatile version of a Les Paul that I've been able to come up with, and I can get more different sounds out of it. All those guitars share that Gibson meaty sound, but they each have their own unique, beautiful thing. And so, especially in the studio, I like to experiment a lot. On stage, I don't experiment as much because the show needs to flow, and I get into a groove playing a Les Paul, and if I can stay with it for a while, I will. Usually if I'm switching, it's because there's a certain sound that I need for the song, or the guitar I'm switching to is in a different tuning.
Right. One of the challenges that so many players face coming out of the blues tradition is we get locked into that blues scale, and you get locked into the blues box. And I don't see that with you or hear that in your playing. You tend to approach things more sometimes along the neck than across the neck in a box. Can you talk a little bit about how a player can break out of that box-centric approach to soloing, if you will?
Well, my friend Mike Barnes, who is a great guitar player that I grew up with, I remember him saying at a very young age, he was talking about some local musician and critiquing his playing, and he said, he's a lick player. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, here's a lick, there's a lick, everything's a lick. He said, you play better if you're just playing one note at a time, and it's not a pre-established lick followed by another pre-established lick. I took that to heart at a very young age, and have always tried to just let the next note be influenced by the previous one and not know in advance what I'm going to play until I actually get there. When you play year after year after year, you can kind of trust yourself to get out of a bind if you paint yourself into a corner. If you play something and you're not exactly sure where to go, then instinct will probably take you there if you let it. You just got to turn your brain off and go with your instinct. I tend to love players that sound like they're just flowing and, as you mentioned, not caught up in the box. I don't like to hear something where someone starts a phrase and you know how it's going to end. So I always try and encourage people to throw themselves curveballs, and if you start out a blues lick, then ended up with a little twist that someone wasn't expecting. There's no right and wrong in music, and the more different music you listen to and expose yourself to and learn from, the more you're going to be able to find your own voice, because your own voice is a combination of everything you've ever learned.
Right. When you're soloing, are you looking for target notes in the chords? Are you thinking about a scale, or how do you organize your soloing?
Well, hopefully I'm not thinking too much in general. If you're thinking, you're sinking. I tend to look at it like you let the entrance dictate where you're going to go. And obviously we all have our certain ways that we start solos and ones that we can fall back on and all that kind of stuff. But if you play the beginning of your solo and then take a breath, it'll kind of tell you where to go from there. And then you just keep following in the footsteps and trying to connect the dots. Anytime you think 8 bars in advance, okay, I'm going to start on the tonic, or I'm going to start on the fifth, or I'm going to start on the flat 7 or whatever, you're kind of missing an opportunity to take a more stream of consciousness approach. A lot of times in the studio, if I play an entrance to a solo that I don't like, somehow it turns into something interesting because I had to get myself out of trouble. And learning how to do that is important as well, because nobody knows what we meant to do. Only we know what we meant to do. When somebody hears you, they only know what you did. So if you played a note that you didn't intend to play, that doesn't mean it didn't sound good. All these kind of things, I've been able to learn from people like Tom Dowd, the great producer that I worked with in the Allman Brothers for so many years, that encourage you to just let go and let the music go where it's going to be, and not put too much pressure on it and not give it too much thought. And that somehow when things are swinging, it's going to be fine.
sure. So speaking of Tom Dowd, obviously one of the grand master producer engineers of all time, now you're producing yourself and you have the Evil Teen record label. What did you take away from working with Tom and the other producers you've worked with as you move into the role of a producer?
One of the things that I learned from Tom was when the band is in a creative mode, he would lay back and you wouldn't even know he was there. And he always wanted the band to solve the problems, musically speaking, if they could. If there was a fork in the road, he would wait and see what the band came up with before he interjected any of his wisdom. But he always wanted it to be our idea, not his idea. And I think that's important when you're working with an artist or with a band. You're there to offer input and guidance and weigh in on the questions that arise, but it's always better if the solutions come from the band and from the artist. And so I tend to try to make myself lay back and wait till the last minute to offer my opinion.
Right, right. So as an artist, as a songwriter, as a vocalist, as a producer, you have a massive body of work that you've been a part of. How do you keep it fresh for yourself? What makes music exciting? Do you still practice? Are you working on things?
I usually keep an acoustic guitar in the room where I'm hanging out and just noodle around all the time. I don't practice in a regimented sort of way. It's much more fun to play with other people. It's hard to appease yourself by yourself. For that reason alone, I tend to write a lot of acoustic-oriented songs when I'm at home by myself, and then I'll get bored with that and pick up an electric guitar and start recording a bunch of riffs and see where that takes me. But it is hard to stay inspired all the time. I think a good thing is to listen to as many different types of music as possible, especially types of music that you're not associated with, because I think that tends to kind of freshen up your brain a little bit. And every now and then take a break and don't listen to anything and just get away from music for a while and then rediscover what it is that made you fall in love with music in the first place.
All right, that's awesome. So we talked a little bit about tone, and we definitely have to mention that Soldano helped facilitate you being here at GearFest, and we're very grateful to them. You've got a beautiful Soldano there to your left, and you're working on something with them, right?
Yeah, this amp is a prototype of something we're talking about, which would be a signature model, SLO 100. I talked to Mike Soldano, I guess in 1989, about changing my amp to give me a beefier sound at a low preamp gain setting. The way those amps were designed, he told me back then, was you got more bottom end when you raise the preamp. And I told him, but I don't want to raise the preamp. I want to keep it set on like 2.5 or 3. And so he changed mine, and I said, can you make it an on and off switch? And he said, yeah. From that moment forward, I never turned that mod off, but it is an on and off switch. The beauty with this new signature amp is it's going to have a knob that blends as much of that mod as you want. So you can change how much of it you're incorporating into your sound, even from song to song. And so that's going to make for a really, really versatile amp. I'm going to give away a trade secret here. A lot of times when I go into the studio, I like to use a combination of big amps like 100-watt amps or 50-watt amps with 412 cabinets with small amps like this Alessandro recording amp here. Sometimes I use the Alessandro by itself and it records magnificently, but I also use it with my Homestead head and with my Soldano heads. And when you blend them in together, there's something about the small amp that rounds out the mid-range in a way that is more suitable to my taste. So the Soldano really only sounds good when you crank it up, and I can't crank it up to give you exactly the sound that it would give me. But I'm going to demonstrate what happens with each of them individually. and then also when you put them together. So this is the soldano by itself. Now this is the same pickup setting and volume setting and tone setting on the guitar, but with the Alessandro instead of the soldano. All right, so when you blend both of them together, you hear the mid-range from the small amp filling out the part of the big amp that has a different sort of mid-range. And I was talking about the rotosphere earlier. If you kick in the rotosphere, it doesn't change the tone that you already have dialed up, which I will use in the middle of a solo. So if I'm playing a solo, and then toward the end of the solo, if I want to kick into another gear, build some excitement, maybe I'll kick the rotosphere on. My tone doesn't change, but all of a sudden there's a Leslie sound. Another trade secret.
Well, we're so grateful you took the time to sit down with us today, and I've got one last question for you. When I have an artist of your stature in an interview with me, someone who shared the stage in the studio with so many wonderful artists, I always have to ask, what makes a great artist?
What makes a great artist is being unique. All the people that I look at as being great artists have this unique quality about what they do that just shines through. I would much rather hear somebody that expresses themselves in a unique, heartfelt, emotional way than someone who can do anything on their instrument but can't decide what represents their own personality. And so that takes us back to my thought that if you open yourself to as many influences as possible, you're much more likely to find out who you are.
Right. Great advice. Great advice. Man, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. It's been a real treat to have you here with us at GearFest 2021.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I hope we can get you out here to Sweetwater as things open up. I know you're heading out on tour in July, right?
Yeah, and excited about that. You know, we all are. It's been too long, so we're ready to get back to work.
All right. Well, look forward to seeing you out on the road.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Warren. Take care. And thank you for joining me here at GearFest 2021. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. We've been chatting with Warren Haynes.